picture a grand English mansion, Yewtree Lodge, where a chilling mystery unfolds. A ruthless businessman, poisoned at breakfast, rye grains in his pocket. His glamorous wife, dead by cyanide, rye scattered nearby. A timid maid, strangled in the garden, a clothes peg on her nose. Each murder echoes the eerie nursery rhyme, "Sing a Song of Sixpence," taunting Inspector Neil and the sharp-eyed Miss Marple, as secrets of greed, betrayal, and a hidden fortune unravel. The killer, lurking among family and servants, plays a deadly game. Who's behind the blackbird's song, and who's next? Dive into this gripping Agatha Christie-style tale of deception and deduction. Chapter 1. Tea and taxine, the autumn morning at Yewtree Lodge, was one of those deceptively serene moments that seemed to promise nothing more sinister than a chilly breeze and a flurry of golden leaves. The house, a sprawling Georgian edifice, nestled in the Kent countryside, stood surrounded by manicured lawns and ancient yew hedges, their dark foliage casting long shadows across the gravel drive. Inside, the dining room gleamed with polished mahogany and silver, its tall windows admitting a pale filtered light that did little to warm the atmosphere. Rex Fortescue, a man whose 55 years had done nothing to soften his bullish demeanour, sat at the head of the table. His suit, impeccably tailored, strained slightly at the shoulders, a testament to his robust frame and penchant for hearty lunches in the city. His face, lined with the marks of a life spent outmanoeuvring rivals, was set in its usual expression of impatient authority. He lifted his teacup, the delicate porcelain looking absurdly fragile in his large hand, and took a sip, his thick brows furrowed instantly. "This tea tastes foul," he growled, his voice carrying the gravelly edge of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He glared across the table at his wife Adele, who sat poised with a fashion magazine spread before her, her lacquered nails tapping idly on the page. She was a striking woman, 30 years her husband's junior, with sleek blonde hair and a figure that owed much to discipline and a couturier's skill. Her lips, painted a vivid scarlet, curved into a faint, distracted smile. "It's probably the new blend, darling," she said without looking up. "You insisted on something exotic, didn't you?" Rex snorted, his eyes narrowing. "Exotic doesn't mean rancid." He took another sip, more out of stubbornness than desire, and his scowl deepened. "Elaine, what's this nonsense about Ceylon tea?" Elaine Fortescue, his daughter-in-law, sat to his left, her thin hands fidgeting with a piece of toast. She was a pale, nervous creature in her late 20s, with mousy brown hair and eyes that darted anxiously toward her father-in-law. Married to Rex's eldest son, Percival, she seemed perpetually caught between deference and dread in the Fortescue household. It's the new order, father," she stammered. "From Fortnum's. You said you wanted something different last week." "Well, it's vile," Rex snapped, slamming the cup into its saucer with a clink that made Elaine flinch. The room fell silent, save for the soft rustle of Adele's magazine and the distant clatter of pans from the kitchen. Mary Dove, the maid, glided in at that moment, her dark uniform crisp and her movements precise as she cleared a stray crumb from the tablecloth. She was young, perhaps 25, with a composed, almost cat-like grace, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without lingering too long. "Shall I fetch another pot, sir?" Mary asked, her voice low and even. Rex waved her off irritably. No, I've had enough of this swill." He pushed back his chair, intending to rise, when a sudden violent shudder seized him. His hand flew to his throat, his face contorting in a grimace of pain. The teacup slipped from the saucer, shattering on the parquet floor, its contents splashing across the polished wood. Rex gasped, a horrible choking sound, and collapsed forward, his head striking the table with a dull thud. Adele screamed, her magazine sliding to the floor as she leapt to her feet. Elaine froze, her eyes wide with horror, her toast crumbling in her hands. Mary Dove, with remarkable presence of mind, darted to Rex's side, loosening his tie as she called for the butler. "Mr. Crump, quickly!" The household erupted into chaos. Crump, the elderly butler, shuffled in, his face blanching at the sight of his master sprawled across the table. Adele's screams grew shrill, punctuated by demands for someone to do something. Elaine, trembling, backed toward the wall, whispering, "Oh no! Oh no!" Servants appeared, hovering uncertainly, until Mary took charge, directing a footman to fetch Dr. Griffiths from the village. Dr. Griffiths, a wiry man with a no-nonsense air, arrived within the hour, his black bag in hand. By then, Rex Fortescue had been moved to a sofa in the drawing-room, his face ashen, his breathing stilled. The doctor's examination was brisk and methodical. He straightened, his expression grim, and turned to Inspector Neal, who had just arrived from the local constabulary, summoned by a quick-thinking Crump. "Taxine," Dr. Griffith said, his voice clipped. "A poison derived from yew berries or needles. It was in the tea, I'd wager. Acts fast. Convulsions, heart failure. He's been dead at least 20 minutes. Inspector Neely, a lean, sharp-eyed man in his 40s, nodded, his notebook already open. He had the look of someone who preferred facts to hysterics, and the Fortescue household was rapidly descending into the latter. Adele, now draped in a black shawl, wept dramatically in an armchair, though Neil noted her tears seemed more performative than heartfelt. Elaine, pale as a ghost, sat clutching a handkerchief, while Mary Dove stood quietly by the door, her hands folded, her face unreadable. Neil knelt beside the shattered teacup, careful not to touch the fragments. "The tea, you say? Who prepared it?" Mary stepped forward. "I did, sir," she said calmly. "This morning, as usual. The leaves were from a new tin in the pantry. I brewed it myself and brought it to the dining room." "And no one else touched it?" Neil asked, his eyes flicking to her. "Not that I saw," Mary replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "But the kitchen was busy. I can't swear to it." Neil made a note, then turned to the butler. "Crump, search Mr. Fortescue's pockets." Crump, still shaken, fumbled through Rex's jacket and produced a curious find. A small handful of rye grains, spilling from a folded handkerchief. He held them out, puzzled. "What's this, sir?" Neil frowned, taking the grains in a gloved hand. "Rye? In his pocket?" He glanced around the room, his mind racing. "This isn't random. Someone meant us to find it." Adele looked up, her tears pausing. "Rye? What does that mean?" Elaine's voice was barely a whisper. It's like the nursery rhyme. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye." Neil's eyes narrowed. "A rhyme? That's an odd coincidence, Mrs. Fortescue." Mary Dove, still by the door, spoke softly. "It's an old rhyme, sir, about deceit and death. 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. Neil turned to her, intrigued. "You know it well, Miss Dove." "I read, sir," she said with a faint, enigmatic smile, "and I notice things." The inspector pocketed the rye grains, his expression thoughtful. "Well, someone's noticed something too, and they've used it to kill. The question is, why?" As the household dispersed, Adele to her boudoir, Elaine to her room, and Mary to her duties, Inspector Neil stood alone in the dining room, staring at the yew hedges visible through the window. A pocket full of rye, a poisoned cup of tea, and a nursery rhyme. This was no ordinary murder. This was a puzzle, and someone in Yewtree Lodge was playing a very dangerous game. Chapter 2. The Nursery Rhyme. The drawing-room at Yewtree Lodge, with its heavy velvet drapes and gleaming walnut furniture, seemed to absorb the weight of the morning's tragedy rather than dispel it. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax, polish, and the faint, lingering bitterness of spilled tea from the dining-room. Inspector Neil stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, his sharp eyes moving from one member of the Fortescue household to another. The family, summoned for questioning, sat in an uneasy tableau, their faces a study in grief, suspicion, and guarded restraint. Adele Fortescue occupied a high-backed chair near the window, her black silk dress accentuating her pallor. She held a lace handkerchief to her lips, though her eyes, dry and calculating, betrayed little of the hysteria she had displayed earlier. Opposite her, Elaine Fortescue perched on the edge of a sofa, her hands twisting a damp handkerchief into knots. Her pale face and nervous glances suggested a woman on the verge of collapse. Percival Fortescue, Rex's eldest son, had just arrived from the city, his thin frame rigid in a perfectly pressed suit. His pinched features and the way he adjusted his spectacles betrayed a man accustomed to control, now grappling with its absence. Mary Dove, the maid, stood discreetly near the door, her presence almost spectral, her dark eyes taking in the scene with quiet intensity. Inspector Neil cleared his throat, his voice measured but firm. "Let's begin with the obvious. Mr. Fortescue was poisoned, taxine, from yew berries or needles. Someone in this house, or with access to it, put it in his tea. I need to know who saw what this morning." Adele lowered her handkerchief, her teasty voice tremulous but edged with indignation. "Really, Inspector, you can't think one of us did this. Rex had enemies, business rivals, men he'd ruined in the city. He was ruthless. Everyone knew it." She gestured vaguely, as if the world beyond Yewtree Lodge were teeming with vengeful financiers. Neil's pen paused over his notebook. Names, Mrs. Fortescue, specifics. Adele hesitated, then shrugged. "Oh, I don't know. That Mackenzie fellow, perhaps. Rex bankrupted him years ago. Or any number of others. Rex never spoke of it to me." Her tone suggested this was a point of pride, as if her ignorance of her husband's affairs elevated her above suspicion. Percival leaned forward, his voice clipped. "She's right, Inspector. Father's mining ventures, gold mostly, made him enemies. He outbid competitors, undercut prices. Men like Mackenzie lost fortunes. But poison—" He shook his head, his spectacles glinting. "That's personal, intimate, not the work of a distant rival." Elaine's voice, barely audible, cut through the tension. Could it have been a mistake? The tea meant for someone else? Her eyes darted to Adele, then away, as if she regretted speaking. Neil's gaze sharpened. "An interesting thought, Mrs. Fortescue. But the tea was poured from the pot Mr. Fortescue used. No one else drank from it." He paused, letting the implication settle. "Then there's the matter of the rye." He produced a small evidence bag, the rye grains inside catching the light. "Found in your father-in-law's pocket. Not something one carries by accident. Any ideas?" The room fell silent. Adele's lips parted, but she said nothing. Percival frowned, adjusting his spectacles again. Elaine stared at the bag, her hands stilling. It was Mary Dove who spoke, her voice soft but clear from her place by the door. "If I may, sir," she said, stepping forward with a grace that drew every eye. "There's an old nursery rhyme. Sing a song of sixpence, a pocket full of rye. It's odd, isn't it? The rye in his pocket, I mean." Neil turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Go on, Miss Dove." Mary's eyes met his, steady and composed. 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. The rhyme is about deceit, isn't it? A king counting his money, a queen eating bread and honey, a maid in the garden, and death, of course. The blackbirds, the maid's nose snipped off. It's all rather grim. Neil's pen scratched across his notebook. A rhyme as a clue? That's theatrical. Are you suggesting someone stage this, Miss Dove? "I'm only saying it's curious, sir," Mary replied, her faint smile enigmatic. "I thought you should know." Percival snorted softly. "A nursery rhyme? Preposterous. Father wasn't the sort for poetic nonsense." "Yet the rye was there," Neil said, pocketing the bag. "And I don't believe in coincidences." He turned to Adele. "Mrs. Fortescue, where were you when the tea was served?" Adele stiffened. "In the dining room, of course, reading. My magazine. I didn't touch the tea. I prefer coffee in the mornings." Her tone was defiant, as if daring him to contradict her. "And you, Mrs. Fortescue?" Neil asked Elaine. I was there too," Elaine said, her voice trembling. "I poured the tea for father, but Mary brought the pot. I wouldn't," she trailed off, tears welling. Neil nodded, his face impassive. "And Mr. Fortescue, you were in London?" Percival nodded. "At the office. I caught the early train. I didn't hear about father until I returned this afternoon." The inspector made a final note, then closed his notebook. "Very well. I'll need to speak with the staff next. Miss Dove, you'll assist with that?" "Of course, sir," Mary said, inclining her head. As the family dispersed, Adele to her boudoir, Percival to the study, Elaine to her room, Neil lingered, his gaze settling on the yew hedges visible through the window. The rhyme, the rye, the poison. It was all too deliberate, too crafted. This was no crime of passion. This was a mind at work taunting him. That evening, in the village of Baden Heath, a new figure arrived at the Blue Boar Inn. Miss Jane Marple, a slight white-haired lady with a deceptively mild demeanour, stepped daintily from the station cab, her black handbag clutched in one hand, a knitting bag in the other. Her nephew, a Scotland Yard man, had mentioned the Fortescue case in passing, and something about it, the whisper of poison, the hint of a riddle, had stirred her curiosity. She thanked the driver with a smile, and entered the inn, her keen eyes already scanning the village beyond. Settling into her room, Miss Marple unpacked her knitting and sat by the window, her needles clicking softly. "A pocket full of rye," she murmured, her mind turning over the phrase. Sing a song of sixpence, such a cheerful little rhyme, and yet so very dark. She paused, her eyes narrowing. Someone has a sense of drama, and drama, in my experience, always hides a purpose. She resumed her knitting, the wool slipping through her fingers like the threads of a puzzle she was already beginning to unravel. Yewtree Lodge, she sensed, was a house of secrets, and the nursery rhyme was only the first verse. Chapter 3. The Second Death. The dawn broke over Yewtree Lodge with a deceptive calm, the pale sunlight filtering through the mist that clung to the Kentish countryside. The house, with its imposing Georgian facade and dark yew hedges, seemed to hunker down against the chill, as if bracing for further calamity. Inside, the atmosphere was taut, the servants moving with hushed steps, their eyes darting nervously toward the closed doors of the drawing-room where Inspector Neal had set up his temporary headquarters. The murder of Rex Fortescue, barely 24 hours past, hung over the household like a storm cloud, and the curious detail of the rye grains found in his pocket had set tongues wagging in the village of Baden Heath. Inspector Neal, his lean frame bent over a notebook at the escritoire, was a man who thrived on order. Yet the Fortescue case was proving maddeningly elusive. The tack scene in Rex's tea, the nursery rhyme, the rye. It all pointed to a mind that delighted in theatrics, yet the motive remained obscured. He had spent the previous evening interviewing the kitchen staff, none of whom could explain how the poison had found its way into the teapot. Mary Dove, the composed maid, had been particularly unhelpful, her answers precise but unrevealing. "I brewed the tea as always, sir," she had said, her dark eyes steady. "The tin was new, unopened. I can't imagine how it was tampered with." Neal, though, had noted the faintest flicker of something, caution, perhaps, in her expression. The clock struck 8. A piercing scream shattered the morning's quiet, echoing from the upper floors. Neal leapt to his feet, his notebook forgotten, and raced toward the source, his boots pounding on the polished oak stairs. The household erupted into motion behind him. Crump, the butler, huffing as he followed. Elaine Fortescue, her face pale, as she emerged from her room. And Percival, still in his dressing gown, his spectacles askew. The scream had come from Adele Fortescue's boudoir, a lavish chamber at the end of the east wing, its door now ajar. Neal burst in to find Adele sprawled across a chaise longue, her silk robe slipping from one shoulder, her blonde hair dishevelled. Her eyes were wide, unseeing, and her lips were parted in a frozen gasp. A delicate china cup lay overturned on the carpet, its contents, a rich, chocolatey cocoa, spilling in a dark stain. Beside the cup, scattered like a cruel afterthought, were a few grains of rye. Dr. Griffiths, summoned once more from the village, arrived with his usual brisk efficiency. He knelt beside Adele, his fingers probing for a pulse, though the rigidity of her limbs told him all he needed to know. "Cyanide," he said after a moment. His voice clipped. The smells unmistakable. Bitter almonds. It was in the cocoa. Death would have been near instantaneous. He pointed to the cup, where a faint residue clung to the rim. Someone meant business. Neal's jaw tightened as he surveyed the room. The boudoir was a shrine to Adele's vanity, a gilded mirror above a dressing table cluttered with perfumes and powders, a wardrobe bursting with furs and silks, a velvet-upholstered chair piled with fashion magazines. Yet the scene felt staged, the rye grains a deliberate echo of Rex's murder. 2 poisons, 2 deaths, he muttered, and that damned rye again. This is no coincidence. Elaine, hovering in the doorway, let out a choked sob. Adele! Oh, how could this happen? Who's doing this? Her hands clutched the doorframe, her knuckles white. Percival, standing beside her, adjusted his spectacles with a trembling hand. It's madness, he said, his voice strained. First father, now Adele. Inspector, you must find whoever's responsible before— He trailed off, his eyes darting toward the window, as if expecting the killer to materialize from the mist. Mary Dove appeared, her apron pristine despite the chaos, and began to tidy the spilled magazines with an almost mechanical calm. Neil turned to her. Miss Dove, who brought Mrs. Fortescue her cocoa? I did, sir, Mary replied, her voice even. She always took cocoa in the mornings, made with milk and a touch of sugar. I prepared it in the kitchen and brought it up at 7:30. And you saw nothing unusual? Neil pressed. Mary shook her head. Nothing, sir. The cocoa was from the pantry, the same brand we've used for weeks. I left the cup on her dressing table and went to tend to the breakfast trays. Neil made a note, his mind racing. Cyanide was not a poison one stumbled upon by accident. It required access, knowledge, and intent. He dismissed Mary and turned to the family. I'll need statements from everyone. No one leaves the house until we've searched every inch. As the household dispersed, Neil knelt beside the rye grains, his gloved fingers collecting them into an evidence bag. The nursery rhyme, Sing a Song of Sixpence, gnawed at him. Mary Dove's mention of it had been too apt, too convenient. Was she merely observant, or was she steering him toward a false trail? And the rye, why leave such an obvious clue? It was as if the killer wanted to be noticed, to flaunt their cleverness. In the village, Miss Jane Marple sat in the cosy parlour of the Blue Boar Inn, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she sipped a cup of Earl Grey. The inn's proprietress, Mrs. Pegg, a stout woman with a penchant for gossip, had regaled her with tales of the Fortescue family over breakfast. "Oh, it's a terrible business, miss," Mrs. Pegg had said, her eyes wide. "Mr. Fortescue poisoned, and now poor Mrs. Fortescue. They say it's yew berries, and rye grains found on both. Like something out of a storybook." Miss Marple had nodded, her mild expression masking the quick workings of her mind. "A storybook indeed," she murmured now, setting her tea aside. "Or a nursery rhyme. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing." She paused, her needles stilling, and the next line, wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? But the rhyme doesn't end there. There's the maid in the garden, isn't there? Along came a blackbird and snipped off her nose. Her eyes narrowed. "I wonder." She rose, slipping her knitting into her bag, and made her way to Whodunit vicarage, where the vicar's wife, Mrs. Harmon, was known for her encyclopedic knowledge of local families. The vicarage was a rambling cottage, its garden bursting with late roses, and Mrs. Harmon welcomed Miss Marple with a tray of scones and a torrent of chatter. "Jane, you've heard about Yewtree Lodge? 2 murders! I can't believe it. Rex, Fortescue was a hard man, mind you, drove a sharp bargain, never gave to the church. But Adele, she was flighty, but harmless. Miss Marple nibbled a scone, her eyes bright with interest. "Tell me about the family, my dear. I understand there are sons." "Oh, yes," Mrs. Harmon said, settling into her chair. "Percival, the eldest, runs the business now. A dry stick, that one. Always in his father's shadow, and not happy about it. Then there's Lance, the younger son. A charmer, but wild. Rex sent him abroad years ago after some scandal. Gambling, I think. He's been in Paris, or was it Nairobi? Nobody's seen him in ages, and Elaine, Percival's wife, poor thing. She's sweet but timid, like a mouse in a lion's den. And the staff?" Miss Marple asked, her tone casual. "There's Mary, Dove, the new maid. Clever girl, came with glowing references. The village girls don't like her, say she's too posh for service. Then there's Crump, the butler, and Gladys, the parlour maid, who's a bit simple but devoted. Oh, and Adele had a friend, Vivian Dubois, an artist. Quite the ladies' man, if you believe the gossip." Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking. "A large household, then, and a nursery rhyme, I hear. Most curious." Mrs. Harmon's eyes widened. "You've heard? Sing a song of sixpence. It's eerie, Jane. Rye in Rex's pocket, and now on Adele's tray. Whoever's doing this has a twisted mind." "Twisted, perhaps," Miss Marple said softly, "but methodical. Nursery rhymes are patterns, my dear, and patterns always lead somewhere." Back at Yewtree Lodge, Inspector Neal was overseeing a search of the kitchen and pantry. The cocoa tin, a brightly labelled brand from London, showed no signs of tampering, but Neal ordered it sent for analysis. The yew hedges, he learned, were a potential source of taxine, their berries and needles toxic if processed correctly. But cyanide? That was another matter. It suggested a different kind of access, perhaps a laboratory, a photographer's studio, or an industrial supplier. He questioned Elaine again, finding her in the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes Rex had never read. "Mrs. Fortescue," he said gently, "did Adele have enemies? Anyone who might have wished her harm?" Elaine's eyes filled with tears. Adele was vain. She liked attention, men especially. But enemies? I don't know. She and father argued sometimes, about money mostly. He thought she spent too much. "And this Vivian Dubois?" Neal asked, recalling Mrs. Pegg's gossip. Elaine flushed. "He visited often. Adele called him her artistic friend. Percival didn't like him. Said he was a fortune hunter." Neal made a note. "And the rye grains? Any thoughts?" Elaine shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "It's like a game. A horrible game. 24 blackbirds. I keep thinking of the rhyme. What's next?" Neal's expression hardened. "That's what I intend to find out." In the village, Miss Marple paid a call on the local chemist, Mr. Jenkins, a fussy man with a penchant for precision. Under the guise of inquiring about a remedy for rheumatism, she steered the conversation toward poisons. "Such a shocking business at Yewtree Lodge," she said, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Yew berries, they say, and now cyanide. I suppose that's hard to come by." Mr. Jenkins adjusted his pince-nez. "Very hard, miss. Cyanide's regulated, used in photography sometimes or pest control, but you'd need a license. Yew berries, though. Those hedges at the lodge are full of them. Anyone could pick a handful, though it'd take knowledge to extract the poison." Miss Marple nodded. her mind cataloguing the information. "Knowledge," she murmured. "Yes, that's the key, isn't it?" As she returned to the inn, the pieces of the puzzle swirled in her mind. Rex, poisoned with taxine, his pocket filled with rye. Adele, killed with cyanide, rye scattered on her tray. The nursery rhyme, with its kings and queens and maids, was a deliberate thread, but was it a clue or a distraction? She thought of her own village, St. Mary Mead, where human nature revealed itself in small, telling ways. Greed, jealousy, betrayal. These were the currents beneath the surface. And Yewtree Lodge was no different. That afternoon, Neil received a telegram from London. Vivian Dubois, Adele's artist friend, had been located at his Chelsea studio. His alibi for Rex's murder held. He'd been at a gallery opening, but his movements on the morning of Adele's death were less clear. "I was painting," he'd told the Metropolitan Police, his tone suave. "Alone, I'm afraid." Neil scribbled a note to summon him for questioning. At Yewtree Lodge, the household was fraying. Percival, poring over his father's ledgers in the study, snapped at Elaine when she offered tea. "Leave me be," he said, his voice tight. "Someone's trying to ruin us, and I need to understand why." Elaine fled, tears streaming, and sought refuge in the garden, where she nearly collided with Mary Dove, who was clipping roses with a pair of shears. "Careful, ma'am," Mary said, her tone gentle but her eyes sharp. "The thorns are sharp today." Elaine nodded, her breath hitching. "Mary, do you think we're all in danger?" Mary's smile was faint, almost cryptic. "I think, ma'am, that someone knows exactly what they're doing, and they're not done yet." Marple, meanwhile, sat in her room at the inn, her knitting abandoned as she sketched the rhyme's verses on a scrap of paper, a pocket full of rye, 24 blackbirds, a king in his counting-house, a queen in her parlour, and then the maid. She circled the word, her lips pursing. "The maid in the garden," she whispered. "Gladys, perhaps. Or Mary, Dove, or someone else entirely." She thought of the Fortescue family, Percival, burdened by duty, Elaine, fragile and frightened, Adele, vain and now dead, and Lance, the absent son, whose shadow loomed over the household, and Vivian Dubois, the charming outsider. Someone she knew was weaving this deadly tapestry, and the rye was their signature. But why? Money, she suspected, or revenge, or both. As the sun set, casting long shadows across Yewtree Lodge, Miss Marple felt a familiar prickle of intuition. The rhyme was a map, and the killer was following it. The question was, how many verses remained? Chapter 4. The Maid's Tale. The atmosphere at Yewtree Lodge had grown oppressive, as though the very walls absorbed the mounting dread that followed the murders of Rex and Adele Fortescue. The late autumn light, filtered through heavy clouds, cast a pall over the estate, and the yew hedges, once merely ornamental, now seemed to loom with menacing intent. Inside, the household moved with the cautious precision of those who sensed danger, but could not name its source. Servants whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward the family, while the family themselves retreated into private griefs and suspicions, each wary of the other. Inspector Neil, his lean face etched with determination, had taken over the library as his base of operations. its shelves of unread books a silent witness to his methodical work. The second murder had intensified the pressure from his superiors, and the press, sniffing a sensational story, had begun to gather in Baden Heath, their questions circling the nursery rhyme and its grim echoes. Neil, however, was not a man swayed by public clamour. He focused on the facts. Taxine in Rex's tea, cyanide in Adele's cocoa, and rye grains at both scenes. A deliberate signature that mocked his efforts to untangle the killer's motive. This morning, he resolved to probe deeper into the household's dynamics, starting with Mary Dove, the maid whose calm demeanour and cryptic reference to the sing, a song of sixpence rhyme, had lingered in his mind. He found her in the kitchen, a vast, tiled room where copper pots gleamed despite the chaos of recent days. Mary was polishing silver, her movements deft and unhurried, her dark hair neatly pinned beneath a crisp cap. The other servants, Gladys, the parlour-maid, and Mrs. Crump, the cook, were conspicuously absent, no doubt tending to their duties, or avoiding the inspector's scrutiny. Miss Dove, Neil began, seating himself at the scrubbed oak table. "You've been at Yewtree Lodge 3 months, correct?" Mary set down a silver spoon, her eyes meeting his with a quiet confidence that bordered on unsettling. "Yes, sir, since August." "And in that time you've observed the family closely," Neil said, his tone conversational but probing. "You're not like the other maids. You're educated, articulate. Why domestic service?" Mary's lips curved into a faint smile, though her expression remained guarded. "I needed work, sir, and the Fortescues paid well. As for observing, it's hard not to notice things in a house like this. People reveal themselves whether they mean to or not." Neil leaned forward, his notebook open. "And what have you noticed, Miss Dove?" "About Mr. Fortescue, Mrs. Fortescue, the others." Mary paused, as if weighing her words. "Mr. Fortescue was a hard man, sir. He ruled the house like he ruled his business, with an iron hand. He didn't trust easily, especially not his family. Mrs. Fortescue, Adele, was decorative. She cared for clothes and admirers more than her husband. Mr. Percival is cautious, always calculating, but he resented his father's control. Mrs. Elaine is kind but frightened, always looking over her shoulder. And then there's Mr. Lance, though I've not met him. The family speaks of him with equal parts fear and fascination." Neeley's pen scratched across the page. "Lance Fortescue, the younger son. He's due to arrive today, I understand. What's the talk about him?" Mary's smile faded slightly. "He's the prodigal, sir. Charming, reckless. Mr. Fortescue favoured him, or so the servants say, but sent him abroad after some trouble. Debts, I think, or a scandal. The others don't trust him, especially Mr. Percival." "And you?" Neil asked, his eyes narrowing. "You quoted that rhyme to me, 'Sing a song of sixpence.' Why? Most maids wouldn't think to connect rye grains to a nursery rhyme." Mary's hands stilled on the silver. "I read, sir. Detective stories, mostly. I notice patterns. The rye in Mr. Fortescue's pocket, then on Mrs. Fortescue's tray. It felt deliberate, like a clue in a novel. I thought you should consider it." Neil studied her, unconvinced by her explanation. She was too composed, too perceptive for a mere maid, and her answers, while plausible, felt rehearsed. "You prepared both the tea and the cocoa," he said, his voice hardening. No one else handled them by your account, yet both were poisoned." Mary's expression didn't falter. "I prepared them, sir, but I didn't poison them. The tea tin was new, the cocoa from a sealed jar. Anyone could have tampered with them before I touched them. Or after. The kitchen's never empty." Neil made a note, his mind turning over her words. She was clever, perhaps too clever, but he had no evidence to hold her. "Very well," he said, rising. "But I'll be watching, Miss Dove. If you notice anything else, you come to me directly." "Of course, sir," Mary said, resuming, her polishing with a serene nod. In the village, Miss Jane Marple was making her own inquiries, her unobtrusive presence allowing her to slip into conversations that others might overlook. She had spent the morning at the church, ostensibly to admire the stained glass, but in truth to speak with Miss Murgatroyd, the organist who knew every scandal in Baden Heath. Over a cup of weak tea in the vestry, Miss Murgatroyd, a wiry spinster, with a penchant for dramatic whispers, shared her insights into the Fortescue household. "It's that rhyme, Miss Marple," she said, her eyes gleaming. "A pocket full of rye. First Mr. Fortescue, then poor Adele. The village is terrified. They say it's a curse, but I say it's human wickedness. Rex Fortescue was a tyrant, cheated half the county in his mining deals. And Adele, well, she was no saint. That artist, Vivian Dubois, was always sniffing around. I saw them at the Rose and Crown once, far too cosy for my liking." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her face a mask of polite interest. "Mr. Dubois, you say? An artist. Does he live locally?" "No, he's in London, but he visited often," Miss Murgatroyd said. "Handsome devil, all charm and no substance. Adele doted on him, bought his dreadful paintings. Percival despised him, called him a leech. And then there's Lance Fortescue, coming back today, I hear. Mark my words, he's trouble. Ran off to Paris after a row with his father. They say he's inherited his father's cunning, but none of his discipline." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing each detail. "And the servants, the maid, Mary Dove, for instance," Miss Murgatroyd sniffed. "Too clever by half, that one. Came from nowhere, with references no one's checked. The village girls don't trust her. She's not one of us. But she's efficient, I'll give her that. Runs the house like clockwork." "Did you?" Miss Marple left the church. Her thoughts turned to the rhyme. 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. The king was dead, the queen too. The next verse spoke of a maid in the garden, a detail that sent a shiver through her. She knew better than to take the rhyme literally, but its structure suggested a plan, a sequence. Someone was following it, and the maid, whether Mary, Gladys, or a symbolic figure, was next in line. At Yewtree Lodge, the arrival of Lance Fortescue brought a new current of tension. He swept into the drawing-room at noon, a tall, lean man in his early 30s, with a disarming smile and eyes that sparkled with mischief. His tailored coat bore the faint creases of travel, and his voice, warm and lightly accented from years abroad, filled the room with an energy the house had lacked. "Percy, old chap!" he exclaimed, clapping his brother on the shoulder. "And Elaine, looking as lovely as ever. What a grim homecoming, eh? Poor old Dad and now Adele. It's like a bad novel." Percival stiffened, his lips thinning. "You've picked a fine. Time to return, Lance. The business is in chaos, and now this nightmare." Lance's smile didn't waver. "I came as soon as I heard about father. Couldn't stay away, could I? Family and all that." He turned to Neil, who had entered to observe. "You must be the inspector. Lance Fortescue, at your service. I suppose I'm a suspect, what with my impeccable timing." Neil's expression was neutral. "Everyone's a suspect, Mr. Fortescue. Where were you when your father died?" "Paris," Lance said promptly. "At a café on the left bank, charming a waitress. I've got witnesses, if you need them. Got the cable about. Father yesterday and caught the first train." "And Mrs. Fortescue's death?" Neil asked. Lance shrugged, his grin fading. "He heard about it when I arrived. Shocking business. Adele was a bit of a peacock, but who'd want her dead?" Neil made a note, unconvinced by Lance's breezy manner. "You stand to inherit, Mr. Fortescue. Your father's will favours you over your brother. That's motive in my book." Lance laughed, a sound that grated in the sombre room. "Motive? Sure, but I'd rather have father alive and shouting at me than a pile of cash and a noose around my neck. Check my alibi, Inspector. I'm clean." Elaine, watching from the sofa, clutched her shawl, her eyes flickering between Lance and Percival. "Lance, please," she whispered. "This isn't a game." "Isn't it?" Lance said, his tone lighter than his words. "Someone's playing, one, with that rhyme and all. Sing a song of sixpence. Clever, if you ask me." Neil's eyes narrowed. "You know the rhyme?" "Who doesn't?" Lance said, spreading his hands. "Nursery stuff. But it's got everyone spooked, hasn't it?" Miss Marple, meanwhile, had ventured to Yewtree Lodge under the pretext of delivering a church pamphlet for the vicar's charity drive. She was shown into the hall by Gladys, the parlour maid, a nervous girl with a round face and a tendency to stammer. "It's too terrible, miss," Gladys whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "First the master, then the mistress. I don't sleep, thinking who's next." Miss Marple patted her arm, her voice soothing. There, my dear, you're doing splendidly. Tell me, do you like working with Miss Dove?" Gladys hesitated, her cheeks flushing. She's very clever, miss. Knows everything. But she's strict. Watches us all the time. I saw her in the pantry once, late at night, looking at the tea tins. I didn't think nothing of it then, but now—" Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained gentle. "Most interesting, my dear. You're very observant. Now, don't you worry. Just keep doing your work." As Gladys scurried off, Miss Marple was admitted to the drawing-room, where she found Elaine, pale and trembling, pouring tea. "Miss Marple," Elaine said, her voice fragile, "you're kind to come. It's all so dreadful." "My dear," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair, "I've seen many troubles in my time, and they always pass. But you must tell me, what's this about Lance? He's just arrived, I hear." Elaine's hands shook as she set down the teapot. He's charming, but he frightens me. He's always been father's favourite, you see. Percival worked so hard, but father only saw Lance. And now, with the will, Percival says Lance gets half the estate. It's not fair." Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking. "Money, my dear, brings out the worst in people. And this rhyme. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. It's meant to distract us, I think. But from what? Greed? Revenge? Elaine's eyes widened. "You think it's all planned? Every bit?" "I think," Miss Marple said softly, "that someone in this house is very clever indeed, and very dangerous." As she left the lodge, Miss Marple paused by the yew hedges, her gaze lingering on the dark berries clustered among the needles. She thought of Mary Dove, with her poised intelligence, and Lance, with his effortless charm. She thought of Gladys, nervous but watchful, and Vivian Dubois, the artist who hovered on the edges of the drama. The rhyme was a thread, but the motive was human, always human. Back at the inn, she sat by the fire, her knitting idle as she traced the rhyme's verses in her mind. The king was in his counting house, counting out his money. The queen was, in her parlour, eating bread and honey. Rex and Adele were gone, but the maid's verse loomed. "A maid in the garden," she murmured, "and a blackbird to snip off her nose. Oh yes, someone is following the rhyme, but they're not finished yet." She closed her eyes, the pieces of the puzzle shifting like shadows. Yewtree Lodge was a stage, and the killer was its director, orchestrating each death with chilling precision. But every director, Miss Marple knew, left a trace, a slip, a flaw, a moment of hubris, and she intended to find it. Chapter 5. The Blackbirds. The third day at Yewtree Lodge dawned with the oppressive stillness, as if the very air held its breath, anticipating further calamity. The Kentish countryside, shrouded in a thin mist, seemed to mirror the fog of fear that had settled over the household. The murders of Rex and Adele Fortescue had cast a long shadow, and the eerie recurrence of rye grains, coupled with the nursery rhyme, "Sing a Song of Sixpence," had transformed the once stately home into a place of whispered dread. Servants moved like ghosts, their tasks performed with mechanical efficiency, while the family, fractured by grief and suspicion, retreated into their private worlds, each wary of the other's motives. Inspector Neely, his sharp eyes shadowed by lack of sleep, stood in the library poring over a map of the estate. The case was a labyrinth, each clue leading to a dead end. The taxine in Rex's tea, sourced from the yew hedges, was accessible to anyone on the property. The cyanide in Adele's cocoa, however, was more elusive, its origins still untraced. The rye grains, scattered at both crime scenes, were a taunt, a deliberate nod to the rhyme that Mary Dove had so pointedly mentioned. Neil's instincts told him the killer was close, perhaps within the walls of Yewtree Lodge, but the motive remained maddeningly obscure. Was it inheritance, as the revised will suggested, favouring Lance over Percival? Or revenge, tied to Rex's ruthless business dealings? Or something more personal, hidden in the family's tangled relationships? His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion from the garden, a cry that cut through the morning's quiet like a blade. Neil dropped his pencil and strode to the French doors, his boots crunching on the gravel path as he followed the sound. Behind him, Percival and Elaine emerged from the drawing-room, their faces pale with alarm. The cry had come from the rose garden, a secluded corner of the estate where trellises heavy with late blooms formed a natural alcove. As Neil rounded the hedge, he stopped short, his breath catching at the sight before him. Gladys, the parlour maid, lay sprawled on the dew-damp grass, her apron twisted beneath her. Her round face, usually flushed with nervous energy, was now a ghastly white. her eyes staring blankly at the sky. A thin cord, likely a length of garden twine, was knotted tightly around her throat, the marks of strangulation vivid against her skin. Most chilling, however, was the clothes peg pinned to her nose, a grotesque, deliberate detail that sent a shiver through Neil. Beside her body, scattered in the grass, were a handful of rye grains, glinting like dark jewels in the morning light. Elaine, catching up, gasped and clutched Percival's arm, her voice a broken whisper. "Gladys! Oh no, not Gladys!" Percival, his spectacles fogging in the chill air, stared in stunned silence, his hands clenching into fists. Neil knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers examining the scene with clinical precision. "Strangled," he muttered, "and the peg, it's the rhyme again." The maid was in the garden, hanging out the clothes. Along came a blackbird and snipped off her nose. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "This is no random killing. It's a performance." Dr. Griffiths, summoned yet again, arrived with his black bag, his face etched with weariness. He confirmed Neil's assessment after a brief examination. Strangulation, likely within the last hour. The peg was added post-mortem, a sick flourish. No poison this time, but the rye ties it to the others. He shook his head. "Whoever's doing this has a twisted mind." Neil stood, his gaze sweeping the garden. The rose trellises offered cover, and the path to the house was obscured by hedges. "She was lured here," he said half to himself, "or followed. Gladys wasn't the sort to wander off alone." He turned to Elaine, who was trembling violently. "Mrs. Fortescue, when did you last see Gladys?" Elaine's voice was barely audible. "Last night after dinner. She was clearing the plates. She seemed nervous more than usual. I thought it was just the murders." Percival cleared his throat, his tone brittle. "Inspector, this has gone too far. 3 deaths in 3 days. You must do something." "I am doing something," Neil snapped, his patience fraying. "But I need answers. Who was in the house this morning? Where's Lance? And Mary Dove?" "Lance is in the study," Percival said, "going through Father's papers. Mary's in the kitchen, I presume. She's always there, organising everything." Neil nodded, his mind racing. Gladys, a simple girl with no enemies, was an unlikely target unless she had seen or heard something dangerous. The clothes peg, a literal interpretation of the rhymes. "I snipped off her nose," suggested a killer who revelled in their own cleverness. But why Gladys? And why now? In the village, Miss Jane Marple sat in the tea shop, a quaint establishment with lace curtains and a view of the high street. She had chosen a table by the window, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes bright with the quiet intensity of one who saw more than she let on. The shop buzzed with gossip, the murders at Yewtree Lodge dominating every conversation. Miss Marple listened, her needles clicking softly, as Mrs. Baker, the shop's proprietress, recounted the latest news to a cluster of customers. "It's that poor maid now, Gladys," Mrs. Baker said, her voice low with relish. "Found in the garden, strangled with a peg on her nose, and rye, just like the others. It's that rhyme, mark my words, sing a song of sixpence. The village is in a panic. They say the lodge is cursed." Miss Marple's lips pursed, though her expression remained serene. "A peg, you say? How very peculiar. And the rhyme, Most people know it, don't they? Oh, aye, Mrs. Baker said, wiping her hands on her apron. My gran used to sing it to me. But to use it like this, it's wicked. They say Lance Fortescue's back, stirring things up. Always was a rogue, that one. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the new information. The rhyme's progression, king, queen, maid, was chillingly precise. Rex, the king in his counting house, Adele, the queen in her parlour, and now Gladys, the maid in the garden. The blackbird, she mused, was the killer, swooping in with deadly intent, but the rhyme's final verses were less clear, and she sensed the killer's plan was not yet complete. She paid for her tea and made her way to the post office, where Miss Weatherby, the postmistress, was a font of local knowledge. Under the guise of buying stamps, Miss Marple steered the conversation toward the Fortescues. "Such a tragedy," she said, her voice soft with sympathy. "Poor Gladys. Did she have family here?" Miss Weatherby, a sharp-eyed woman with a love of detail, leaned across the counter. "No family, miss. Gladys was an orphan, came from a home in London. Sweet girl, but simple. She was devoted to Mrs. Elaine, followed her like a puppy. But that Mary Dove, she ran the staff with an iron hand. Gladys was scared of her, I reckon." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. "Scared? That's curious. Mary Dove seems so capable." "Too capable, if you ask me," Miss Weatherby said, lowering her voice. "Came out of nowhere, with references from some fancy agency. Knows more than she lets on. I saw her in the village once, posting a letter to London. Looked furtive, she did." Miss Marple tucked the information away, her mind weaving connections. Mary Dove's intelligence, Gladys's fear, Lance's return. Each was a thread in the tapestry of the case. She thanked Miss Weatherby and stepped into the street, her thoughts turning to the rhyme's next verse. There was no clear blackbird in the text, but the image lingered, a symbol of treachery. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a seemingly innocent gesture, a gift of flowers, had masked a deadly intent. Human nature, she knew, was the key, and Yewtree Lodge was a microcosm of its darkest impulses. Back at the lodge, Neil questioned Lance Fortescue in the study, a wood-panelled room heavy with the scent of old leather and cigar smoke. Lance lounged in a chair, his legs crossed, his charm undimmed by the grim circumstances. "Another murder, Inspector," he said, raising an eyebrow. "You're not having much luck, are you?" Neil ignored the jibe, his pen poised. "Where were you this morning, Mr. Fortescue? Between 6 and 8. "Sleeping," Lance said, his grin unrepentant. "Got in late from the village pub. The Blue Boar, decent ale. Woke up when I heard the shouting. Poor Gladys, never thought she'd be a target." "You knew her?" Neil asked, his eyes narrowing. "Barely," Lance said, shrugging. "Saw her scurrying about, always nervous. Not the sort to make enemies, I'd think." Neil leaned forward. "You're quick to joke, Mr. Fortescue, but you're in a precarious position. Your father's will gives you half the estate, more than your brother. That's a powerful motive for 3 murders." Lance's smile faded, his eyes hardening. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Inspector. I didn't need to. Kill for money. Father sent me plenty abroad, and I've got my own ventures. Besides, strangling a maid. Not my style." Neil made a note, unconvinced. Lance's alibi was shaky, and his nonchalance felt calculated. "We'll check the pub," he said, "and don't leave the house without my permission." As Lance sauntered out, Neil turned to the window, where the rose garden was visible, now cordoned off with tape. Gladys's death was different. No poison, but the same theatrical flourish. The killer was escalating, their confidence growing. He needed to trace the cyanide, and fast. Miss Marple, meanwhile, paid a visit to Yewtree Lodge, this time invited by Elaine, who had taken to her gentle presence like a lifeline. They sat in the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with potted ferns and the faint scent of damp earth. Elaine, her eyes red-rimmed, poured tea with trembling hands. "Miss Marple, I can't bear it," she said, her voice breaking. Gladys was so kind, so harmless. Why her? And that peg, it's monstrous. Miss Marple patted her hand, her voice soothing. "My dear, it's a terrible thing, but we must be brave. Tell me, did Gladys ever mention anything odd? About the tea, the cocoa, or perhaps Mary Dove?" Elaine hesitated, her brow furrowing. She did say something a few days ago. She saw Mary in the pantry, late at night, with the tea tin. Gladys thought it was strange, but she was too scared to ask. And yesterday, she told me she'd heard voices in the hall after midnight. She couldn't make out who, but she was frightened. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. "Voices, you say? Most interesting. And Lance, how has he been since his return?" Elaine's lips trembled. "He's too cheerful. It's not right, with father and Adele, and now Gladys gone. Percival's furious with him. They argued last night about the will. Percival said Lance was scheming, that he'd come back to take everything." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes distant. "Money, my dear, is a great revealer of character. And this rhyme, it's a mask meant to confuse us. But the truth is always simpler. Greed, betrayal, fear, these are the blackbirds in the pie, waiting to sing." As she left the conservatory, Miss Marple caught sight of Mary Dove crossing the hall, a tray of silver in her hands. Their eyes met briefly, and Miss Marple sensed a flicker of calculation in the maid's gaze. A clever girl, she thought, but perhaps too clever for her own good. That afternoon, Neeley received a report from the laboratory. The cyanide was industrial grade, likely from a photographic supplier. Vivian Dubois, Adele's artist friend, used such chemicals in his darkroom, but his alibi for Gladys's murder, painting in his studio, held, albeit thinly. Neil dispatched a constable to London to press Dubois further. In the village, the fear was palpable. Shops closed early, and parents kept their children indoors, whispering of a blackbird killer stalking Baden Heath. Miss Marple, undeterred, visited the gardener, Mr. Hodges, a grizzled man who tended the lodge's grounds. "Them hedges," he said, spitting into the dirt. "They're poison, right enough. Berries, needles, all bad. But you'd need to know how to use 'em. And that twine came from my shed, I reckon. Anyone could have taken it." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind turning to the rhyme structure. The maid's verse was complete, but the rhyme's earlier lines, wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? Suggested a broader plan. The killer was not finished, and the blackbirds, she suspected, were the secrets each suspect carried. As night fell, Miss Marple sat in her room at the Blue Boar Inn, her knitting idle. She traced the rhymes verses on a notepad, her lips pursed. "The blackbirds are flying," she murmured, "but who is the hand that sets them free?" She thought of Lance's charm, Mary's composure, Percival's resentment, Elaine's fear. Someone she knew was orchestrating this deadly symphony, and the next note was yet to sound. Chapter 6. The King's Counting House. The fourth day at Yewtree Lodge brought a shift in the air, a restless energy that seemed to pulse through the house like a heartbeat. The murders of Rex Fortescue, Adele, and now Gladys had woven a tapestry of terror, each thread tied to the sinister nursery rhyme, "Sing a Song of Sixpence." The village of Baden Heath, once a sleepy enclave, buzzed with fear and speculation, its residents locking their doors at dusk and whispering of a killer who wielded poison and twine with equal precision. At the lodge, the yew hedges cast long, ominous shadows, their dark foliage a constant reminder of the poison that had claimed Rex and the unseen hand that orchestrated the carnage. Inspector Neil, his lean frame taut with determination, stood in the study, a room that had once been Rex Fortescue's sanctum. The walls were lined with maps of gold mines and ledgers, relics of a man whose ambition had built an empire, and enemies to match. Neely's investigation had reached a critical juncture. 3 deaths, each marked by rye grains, and a verse of the rhyme pointed to a killer within the household. Yet the motive remained elusive. Was it the inheritance, skewed by Rex's will in favour of his prodigal son, Lance? Or a vendetta rooted in Rex's ruthless past? The clothes peg on Gladys's nose, a grotesque echo of the rhymes made in the garden, had confirmed the killer's theatrical bent. But Neely sensed a deeper purpose beneath the flourish. His morning began with a journey to London, a necessary detour to probe the financial heart of Rex's empire. The Fortescue offices, a sleek suite in the aged city, were a stark contrast to the lodge's Georgian grandeur. Percival Fortescue, pale and tense, met Neil at the entrance, his spectacles glinting under the fluorescent lights. "I hope this is quick, Inspector," he said, his voice clipped. "The business is teetering. Father's death has spooked our investors." Neil nodded, his notebook already open. "I need access to your father's accounts, Mr. Fortescue. Private ones, not just the company ledgers. There's talk of a secret fund." Percival's lips thinned, but he led Neely to a corner office, its desk piled with papers. "Father was unorthodox," he admitted, unlocking a safe. "He kept certain dealings off the books. I only discovered this after his death." He produced a slim ledger, its pages filled with cryptic entries. "Transfers to an offshore account starting 6 months ago. Large sums, Inspector. I suspect he was funneling money to Lance." Neil's eyes narrowed as he scanned the figures. "Your brother? Why?" Percival's hands clenched. "Father always favoured Lance, despite his recklessness. I managed the business, kept it afloat, but Father saw Lance as his true heir. This account, it's proof. Lance knew, I'm sure, of it." Neil made a note, his mind racing. If Lance stood to gain a fortune beyond the will, it strengthened his motive. But the murders of Adele and Gladys didn't fit neatly into a financial scheme. "I'll need this ledger analysed," he said, slipping it into his briefcase. "And your father's rivals, Mackenzie, for instance. Any recent contact?" Percival shook his head. "Mackenzie's in Scotland, Ruined but harmless. Father's enemies were many, but none close enough to poison his tea. Back at Yewtree Lodge, Neil found the household in disarray. Elaine, her eyes red from crying, was in the drawing-room, clutching a letter she'd found in Adele's boudoir. "Inspector," she said, her voice trembling, "it's from Vivian Dubois. I didn't know whether to show you." Neil took the letter, its paper scented with Adele's perfume. The handwriting was elegant, the tone intimate. "My dearest, your husband's suspicions are tiresome, but we'll find a way. Meet me in London next week. Yours, V." Neil's jaw tightened. When was this written? "Last month," Elaine said, wringing her hands. Adele was restless. She and father argued often. I think she was in love with Vivian. Neil pocketed the letter, his mind turning to Dubois, the artist whose alibi for Gladys's murder was shaky. "I'll need to speak with him again," he said. "And Elaine, have you noticed anything unusual about Lance since his return?" Elaine hesitated, her gaze flickering to the door. "He's too calm, laughing, joking, as if none of this touches him. Percival hates it. They fought again last night in the study. I heard Percival shout something about the will." Neil nodded, filing the detail away. Lance's nonchalance was either genuine innocence or a calculated mask, and he intended to find out which. In the village, Miss Jane Marple pursued her own line of inquiry, her unassuming presence allowing her to glean insights others missed. She had spent the morning at the Women's Institute, where the local matrons gathered to knit and gossip. Mrs. Dixon, a farmer's wife with a sharp tongue, was eager to share her thoughts on the Fortescues. "That Lance Fortescue," she said, her needles clacking furiously. "He's a devil with a smile. Came back to stir trouble, I reckon. And that Mary Dove, she's no maid. Too clever, too polished. My cousin's girl applied for that job and was turned away. Mary swooped in, like she'd been waiting." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained mild. "Mary Dove, you say? Has she been in the village long?" 3 months, Mrs. Dixon said, sniffing. "Keeps to herself, but I saw her at the station once, sending a telegram. Looked nervous, she did. Not the sort of thing maids do." Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail. A telegram suggested connections beyond Yewtree Lodge, perhaps a link to the killer's broader plan. She thanked Mrs. Dixon and made her way to the lodge, invited by Elaine for tea. The conservatory, with its lush ferns and glass walls, was a fragile oasis in the house's gloom, and Elaine's gratitude for Miss Marple's presence was palpable. "Miss Marple," Elaine said, pouring tea with unsteady hands, "I feel like I'm losing my mind. Gladys's death, that peg, it's inhuman. And Lance, he's so different from the boy I knew. He's hiding something, I'm sure of it." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze thoughtful. "My dear, people often hide their true selves, especially in times of crisis. Tell me, what do you know of your father-in-law's business? Was there tension over money?" Elaine's eyes widened. "Oh, yes. Father was secretive, always locking his study. Percival said he was diverting funds, but I didn't understand it. And Adele, she spent lavishly, which drove father mad. He threatened to cut her off once in front of us all." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Money, my dear, is a great revealer. And this rhyme, the king was in his counting house, counting out his money. It's not just a clue, is it? It's a mirror, reflecting the greed and betrayal in this house. Elaine's lips trembled. You think it's all about money? But Gladys, she had nothing. Gladys saw something, Miss Marple said gently, or heard something. The killer couldn't risk her talking. The peg, the rye, their distractions, meant to keep us chasing shadows. As Miss Marple left the conservatory, she caught sight of Lance in the hall, his lean frame silhouetted against a window. He was speaking to Mary Dove, his voice low, her expression unreadable. Miss Marple paused, her keen eyes noting the familiarity in their posture. Most interesting, she thought. A maid and a prodigal son. What secrets do they share? London, Neelie met Vivian Dubois at his Chelsea studio, a cluttered space filled with canvases and the sharp scent of chemicals. Dubois, a handsome man in his 40s with a practised charm, greeted Neil with a wry smile. "Inspector, you're persistent. I told your men I was painting when Adele died. Alone, alas." Neil's gaze swept the room, lingering on a shelf of photographic supplies. "Cyanide, Mr. Dubois. You use it in your darkroom, and you were close to Mrs. Fortescue, close enough to write her love letters." Dubois' smile faltered. "Adele was a friend, nothing more. Yes, I use cyanide, but it's locked away. And I had no reason to kill her, or anyone else. Rex was a bore, but I didn't know the maid." Neil pressed him on his movements, but Dubois' alibi held, backed by a neighbour who'd seen him at his easel. Frustrated, Neil returned to Yewtree Lodge, where a new lead awaited. The gardener, Mr. Hodges, had found a scrap of paper near the rose garden, overlooked in the initial search. It was a torn receipt, dated the previous week, for a chemical supply shop in London. Neil's pulse quickened. Cyanide, perhaps? He confronted Mary Dove in the kitchen, where she was arranging a tray for Elaine. "Miss Dove," he said, holding up the receipt, "this was found near Gladys's body. Care to explain?" Mary's eyes flicked to the paper, her composure unshaken. "I've never seen it, sir. I don't go to London. My duties keep me here." "And yet you're always in the right place," Neil said, his voice hard. "The tea, the cocoa, now this. You know more than you're saying." Mary's smile was faint, almost pitying. "I notice things, sir, as I told you. But I don't kill. If I knew who did, I'd tell you." Neil let her go, his instincts screaming that she was holding back. He turned his attention to the yew hedges, where a constable had collected berries for analysis. The taxine was confirmed, but its preparation required skill. Someone with knowledge of chemistry or botany. Mary? Dubois? Or another player, yet unseen? Miss Marple, back at the Blue Boar Inn, sat by the fire, her knitting idle as she pondered the case. The rhyme's verses ran through her mind. The king was in his counting-house. The queen was in her parlour. The maid was in the garden. Gladys's death had completed the third verse, but the rhyme's earlier lines, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie, suggested a broader conspiracy. The blackbirds, she mused, were the secrets, the lies, the betrayals that bound the household. And the pie. That was Yewtree Lodge itself, a container for its deadly contents. She thought of her own village, St. Mary Mead, where a stolen necklace had once unmasked a murderer. The principle was the same. human nature revealed itself in small, telling ways. Lance's charm, Mary's poise, Percival's resentment, Elaine's fear. Each was a clue, a blackbird waiting to sing. And Vivian Dubois, with his cyanide and his letters, was a shadow on the edges, neither central nor innocent. Miss Marple opened her notepad, sketching the rhyme's structure. "The counting house," she murmured. "Rex's money, his will, his secrets. That's where the truth lies." She recalled Elaine's mention of the locked study, Percival's anger over the diverted funds. Money was the pulse of this case, but the rhyme was its rhythm, guiding the killer's hand. As night fell, Neil gathered the household in the drawing-room, his voice grim. 3 murders, all tied to this rhyme. Rex, Adele, Gladys. The killer is among us, and I'm closing in. If anyone knows anything, speak now. Lance leaned back, his grin insolent. "Quite a show, Inspector. But you're no closer to catching your blackbird, are you?" Percival's face flushed. "This isn't a game, Lance. Someone's trying to destroy us." Elaine, silent, clutched her shawl, her eyes darting to Mary Dove, who stood by the door, her face a mask of calm. Miss Marple, invited as Elaine's guest, watched from a corner, her needles still. "The blackbirds are singing," she thought, "but the pie is still closed. Who will open it next?" She closed her eyes, the puzzle's pieces shifting. The killer was bold, but every bold move carried risk. A receipt, a letter, a glance, something would betray them. And Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, was ready to listen. Chapter 7. The Queen's Parlour. The 5th day at Yewtree Lodge unfolded under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, the clouds casting a sombre veil over the Kentish estate. The murders of Rex Fortescue, Adele and Gladys had transformed the once grand house into a crucible of fear, its inhabitants moving with the wary vigilance of those who sensed a predator among them. The nursery rhyme Sing-a-Song of Sixpence, with its cryptic verses and sinister echoes, had become a grim leitmotif, each death marked by rye grains and a chilling fidelity to the rhyme's structure. The village of Baden Heath, gripped by panic, whispered of curses and blackbirds, while the press, camped at the village inn, spun lurid tales of a poetic killer. Inspector Neil, his lean face etched with the strain of sleepless nights, stood in the hall, his notebook a constant companion. The case was a tangle of motives and misdirection. Rex's taxine-laced tea, Adele's cyanide-tainted cocoa, and Gladys's strangulation, each punctuated by the rhyme's verses: king, queen, maid. The clothes peg on Gladys's nose, a macabre nod to the snipped-off her nose-line, had confirmed the killer's penchant for theatricality, but Neil sensed a colder purpose beneath the flourish. The financial trail, Rex's secret account favouring Lance, pointed to greed. Yet the murders of Adele and Gladys suggested a broader vendetta, a settling of scores that eluded his grasp. His morning began with a renewed focus on the household's undercurrents, particularly the tensions between Lance and Percival, whose rivalry over their father's fortune simmered like a slow-burning fuse. Neil found Percival in the dining room, his thin frame hunched over a stack of documents, his spectacles slipping down his nose. The room, still bearing the faint stain of Rex's spilled tea, felt oppressive, its tall windows admitting a dull, grey light. "Mr. Fortescue," Neil said, his voice measured. "I've had the offshore account analysed. The transfers total over £100,000, all directed to a trust in Lance's name. Did you know the extent of it?" Percival's hand froze on a ledger, his jaw tightening. "I suspected," he said, his voice low and bitter. "Father was always blind to Lance's flaws. I kept the business running, Inspector, while Lance gallivanted abroad, squandering money, and yet Father rewarded him. It's an insult." Neil's pen scratched across his notebook. "Enough to drive you to act, perhaps. 3 deaths clear the way for you to control the estate, with Lance as the obvious suspect." Percival's head snapped up, his eyes flashing. "That's outrageous! I despised Father's favouritism, yes, but I didn't kill him, or Adele, or Gladys. Lance is the one with the motive. He's back, isn't he? Stirring trouble, charming everyone, while I'm left to clean up the mess." Neil studied him, noting the flush of anger, the tremor in his hands. "Where were you last night, Mr. Fortescue?" "Between midnight and 2. "In my room," Percival said, adjusting his spectacles. "Reading. Elaine can confirm it. She was with me until 11, then went to bed." Neil made a note, his mind turning to Lance, whose flippant demeanour grated as much as Percival's rigidity. He found the younger Fortescue in the billiard room, idly knocking balls across the green felt, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the house's gloom. Lance's grin was undimmed, though his eyes held a guarded edge. "Inspector," he said, leaning on his cue, "you look like a man chasing his own tail." Another dead end. Neil ignored the taunt. "The offshore account, Mr. Fortescue. Your father set it up for you. £100,000. That's a lot of money to kill for." Lance's grin widened, though his knuckles whitened on the cue. "So I'm the villain, eh? Look, Father sent me money abroad, sure, but I didn't need to poison him for it. As for Adele and Gladys, why would I bother? I barely knew them. You're fishing, Inspector, and the pond's dry. Your alibi for Gladys's murder is thin," Neil said, his voice hard. "The pub staff say you left at 10, not midnight. Where were you after that?" Lance shrugged, his nonchalance infuriating. "Wandering, thinking. I like the night air. No crime in that, is there?" Neil's eyes narrowed. "Not yet, but I'm watching you, Mr. Fortescue. One slip, and I'll have you." In the village, Miss Jane Marple pursued her own quiet investigation. Her unassuming presence a key that unlocked doors others found barred. She had spent the morning at the local library, a cramped room above the village hall, where Miss Finch, the librarian, was a treasure trove of gossip. Over a pot of tea, Miss Finch shared her observations of the Fortescue household, her pince-nez glinting with excitement. "It's that rhyme, Miss Marple," she said, her voice hushed. "The Queen was in her parlour, eating bread and honey, Adele, of course, with her cocoa, and now poor Gladys, the maid. But what's next? The rhyme's running out, isn't it?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes bright with interest. "Not quite, my dear. The rhyme begins with blackbirds, doesn't it? 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. I wonder if the killer sees themselves as the pie maker, serving up their victims to some twisted justice." Miss Finch shivered. "That's chilling. But who?" "Lance Fortescue's the talk of the village, back from Paris, all charm and secrets. And Vivian Dubois, that artist. I saw him at the station last month buying a ticket to London. Looked shifty, if you ask me." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail. Dubois' connection to Adele, confirmed by the love letter, made him a person of interest. But his alibis, while thin, had held. She thanked Miss Finch and made her way to Yewtree Lodge, where Elaine had invited her for luncheon. The dining room, now cleared of its tragic associations, was a subdued setting, with Elaine presiding over a simple meal of cold meats and salad. Her face was drawn, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice fragile, "I don't know how you stay so calm. I feel like the house is closing in on us. Percival's obsessed with the business, Lance is, unnerving, and Mary Dove, she's everywhere, watching." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, though her eyes were sharp. "My dear, fear makes us see shadows, but the truth is often plain. Tell me, has Mary said anything about the murders? Or Lance, perhaps?" Elaine hesitated, her gaze dropping to her plate. "Mary's been kind in her way. She brought me tea. Last night said I looked peaky. But she's so controlled. As for Lance, he's been asking about Father's papers, poking around the study. Percival caught him there yesterday and shouted at him to leave. I heard Lance laugh. It was chilling." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind turning over the image of Lance in the study. "The study, you say? Where your father kept his secrets, most interesting. And this Vivian Dubois, did he visit often?" Elaine flushed. "Too often. Adele was besotted. Father suspected, I think. He threatened to cut her allowance, but she laughed it off. Vivian sent her gifts, sketches mostly. They're still in her boudoir." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the rhyme's second verse. "The Queen was in her parlour, eating bread and honey." Adele's death had fit the pattern, but the parlour was more than a room. It was a state of mind, a place of indulgence and betrayal. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen brooch had unmasked a jealous lover. The principle was the same. Human nature betrayed itself in small, telling ways. After luncheon, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, her keen eyes catching a glimpse of Mary Dove descending the stairs, a duster in hand. Their gazes met, and Miss Marple sensed a flicker of wariness in the maid's composed features. "Good afternoon, Miss Dove," she said, her voice mild. "You must be terribly busy with all this tragedy." Mary's smile was polite, but her eyes were guarded. "I manage, miss. The house doesn't run itself, even in grief." "Quite so," Miss Marple said, her tone disarming. "You're very observant, I hear. That rhyme you mentioned, Sing a Song of Sixpence, it was a clever connection. Have you noticed anything else? About the family, perhaps?" Mary's hand tightened on the duster, a fleeting gesture. "I keep to my place, miss. But people talk, don't they? Mr. Lance is charming, but he unsettles the others. Mr. Percival's all nerves, and Mrs. Elaine, she's fragile. That's all I'll say." Miss Marple nodded, her smile unwavering. "You're a wise girl, my dear, but wisdom can be dangerous in a house like this." As Mary moved off, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the rhyme's progression. The king, queen, and maid were gone, but the blackbirds remained, a symbol of treachery woven through the verses. She suspected the killer saw themselves as an agent of justice, punishing the Fortescues for their sins, greed, infidelity, neglect. But whose justice, and at what cost? Back in the library, Neil received a report from his London team. The chemical supply shop receipt found near Gladys's body, traced to a store that sold cyanide to licensed buyers, including Vivian Dubois. His darkroom, searched that morning, yielded a vial with traces of the poison, but his fingerprints were absent, suggesting careful handling, or a plant. Neil dispatched a constable to bring Dubois to the lodge for questioning, his instincts screaming that the artist was more than a bystander. He turned his attention to the yew hedges, where a forensic team had confirmed the taxine source. The berries, easily harvested, required distillation, a process beyond the average household's knowledge. Neil questioned the gardener, Mr. Hodges, who swore no one had touched his tools. But that shed's never locked, Hodges admitted, spitting into the dirt. Anyone could have sneaked in. Neely's frustration mounted. The killer was meticulous, leaving just enough clues to taunt him, yet nothing to pinpoint their identity. He confronted Lance again, finding him in the garden, tossing pebbles into a fountain. "Mr. Fortescue," Neil said, his voice sharp, "your father's account was meant for you. Did you know about it before his death?" Lance's grin was lazy, but his eyes were wary. "Vaguely. Father sent me funds now and then, said he'd set something aside. Didn't know it was that much, though. Makes me look guilty, doesn't it?" "It does," Neil said, stepping closer. "And you're wandering the night Gladys died? Nobody saw you. Care to revise your story?" Lance tossed another pebble, his tone light. "Nope. I was clearing my head, Inspector. You'll have to do better than that." Neil let him go, his mind turning to Mary Dove. Her omnipresence, her calm, her cryptic remarks. She was a puzzle he couldn't crack. He found her in the pantry, inventorying supplies, her apron pristine. "Miss Dove," he said, holding up the receipt, "this shop sells cyanide. You've been to London, haven't you? For errands, perhaps?" Mary's eyes flicked to the receipt, her composure unshaken. "Once or twice, sir, for Mrs. Fortescue's shopping, but I've never been to that shop. I'm a maid, not a chemist." Neil pressed her, but her answers were airtight, her demeanour infuriatingly serene. As he left the pantry, he caught sight of Elaine in the hall, her face pale as she clutched a letter. "Inspector," she whispered, "I found this in Father's study. It's about Lance." Neil took the letter, its ink faded but legible. It was from Rex, dated a month before his death. "Lance, my boy, the trust is secure. Percival will fight it, but you're my legacy. Come home soon." Neil's pulse quickened. The letter confirmed Lance's motive, but it also deepened the mystery. Why kill Adele and Gladys? In the village, Miss Marple visited the seamstress, Mrs. Lyle, who had altered Adele's dresses. Over a cup of tea, Mrs. Lyle shared a tidbit. "Adele was giddy last month, said she was planning a trip with a friend. I reckon it was that Dubois. She ordered a new gown, all silk and lace, like a bride." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "A bride, you say? Most curious." She thought of Adele's parlour, her indulgence, her betrayal. The rhymes queen was a symbol of vanity, and Adele had embodied it. But the blackbirds, she mused, were the secrets that flew free, exposing the household's rot. As dusk fell, Miss Marple sat in her room at the Blue Boar Inn, her knitting idle. She traced the rhyme's verses on a notepad. No, Queen was in her parlour, eating bread and honey. The parlour was Adele's world. but it was also the house itself, a stage for its dramas. She thought of Lance's letter, Mary's poise, Dubois' cyanide, Percival's rage. The killer was weaving a deadly pattern, but every pattern had a flaw. She closed her eyes, the puzzle's pieces shifting. "The blackbirds are circling," she murmured, "but the pie is cracking. Someone will slip, and soon." Her needles resumed their clicking, a soft counterpoint to the storm brewing at Yewtree Lodge. Chapter 8. The birds take flight. The 6th day at Yewtree Lodge broke with a storm, the rain lashing the Georgian facade and turning the gravel drive into a quagmire. The murders of Rex Fortescue, Adele and Gladys had cloaked the house in a miasma of dread, each death a grim verse in the nursery rhyme, "Sing a song of sixpence." The rye grains, scattered like sinister breadcrumbs, and the chilling fidelity to the rhyme's structure, king, queen, maid, had transformed the estate into a stage for a macabre drama. In Baden Heath, the village pulsed with fear, its residents, huddling in parlours and pubs, their whispers of blackbirds and curses drowned by the howling wind. The press, undeterred by the weather, swarmed the Blue Boar Inn, their headlines screaming of a poetic killer who eluded Scotland Yard. Inspector Neil, his lean frame taut with the weight of the case, stood in the drawing-room, its velvet drapes drawn against the storm's fury. The investigation had reached a fever pitch. 3 murders, each tied to the rhyme, pointed to a killer within the household, yet the motive, greed, revenge, or something darker, remained a shadow just beyond his reach. The offshore account favouring Lance Fortescue, the love letter from Vivian Dubois to Adele, the chemical receipt near Gladys's body, all were pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. The clothes peg on Gladys's nose, a grotesque echo of the rhymes snipped off her nose, had confirmed the killer's flair for theatrics. But Neil sensed a calculating mind behind the flourish, one that thrived on misdirection. His morning began with a bold move, a confrontation with the entire household, a gambit to shake loose the truth. He gathered them in the drawing-room, its chandelier casting a cold light over the assembled faces. Percival Fortescue sat rigid, his spectacles glinting with suppressed fury. Elaine, pale and trembling, clutched a shawl, her eyes darting nervously. Lance lounged in an armchair, his grin insolent, though his fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the armrest. Mary Dove stood by the tea-tray, her apron pristine, her expression a mask of serene efficiency. Even Crump, the butler, hovered near the door, his rheumy eyes wide with apprehension. Neil's voice cut through the room's tension, sharp and unyielding. 3 murders in 5 days, all tied to this rhyme, sing a song of sixpence. Rex, Fortescue, poisoned with taxine. Adele, killed with cyanide. Gladys, strangled, with a clothes peg and rye grains as a calling card. The killer is here, among us, and I'm done with games. Someone knows something. Speak now, or I'll tear this house apart until I find it. Percival's voice was brittle, his hands clenching. This is outrageous, Inspector. You've had days to catch this maniac, and yet here we are, accused in our own home. It's Lance, isn't it? He's the one who benefits. Father's will, that secret account. He's been scheming all along. Lance's laugh was a low, mocking sound. Oh, Percy, you're predictable. Point the finger at me, why don't you? I was in Paris when Father died, and I've got no reason to kill Adele or a maid. You're the one sweating over the business, scrambling to keep it afloat. Maybe you snapped." Elaine's voice, barely a whisper, broke the standoff. "Please, both of you, stop. This isn't helping. Inspector, I don't know who did this, but it's tearing us apart. The rhyme, it's like a curse." Neil's eyes flicked to Mary Dove, who was pouring tea with mechanical precision. "Miss Dove, you've been at the heart of this, preparing the tea, the cocoa, noticing the rhyme. Anything to add?" Mary's gaze met his, steady and unyielding. "I've told you what I know, sir. I saw the rye, recognized the rhyme. I'm a servant, not a detective, but if I may, someone in this house is very clever. They're using the rhyme to hide their tracks, to make it seem like madness. It's not." Neil's pen paused, his instincts prickling. Mary's composure was a wall, but her words echoed his own suspicions. The rhyme was a smokescreen, a deliberate veil over a colder motive. He turned to Lance. "Mr. Fortescue, your alibi for Gladys's murder is crumbling. The pub landlord says you left at 9, not midnight. Care to explain?" Lance's grin didn't waver, though his eyes hardened. "I told you, Inspector, I was wandering. Got a bit lost in the lanes. No crime in that unless you're desperate to pin something on me." Percival snorted. "Wandering? You're a liar, Lance. You've always been Father's pet, scheming, behind my back. That account, hundreds of thousands, all for you. You killed him for it, didn't you?" The room crackled with tension. Elaine's sob the only sound as Lance leaned forward, his voice low. "Careful, Percy. Accuse me again, and I'll start asking where you were when Gladys died. Reading in your room, or sneaking through the garden." Neil raised a hand, silencing them. "Enough! I'm having every room searched, every alibi checked. If anyone's holding back, now's the time to come clean." His gaze swept the room, lingering on Mary's impassive face, Elaine's trembling hands, Lance's defiant smirk. No one spoke, and the silence was heavier than the storm outside. In the village, Miss Jane Marple sat in the parlour of the vicarage, her knitting bag at her side, her keen eyes bright with the quiet intensity of one who saw patterns where others saw chaos. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Harmon, had invited her for tea, eager to discuss the lodge's tragedies. The parlour, with its chintz curtains and crackling fire, was a haven from the storm, but the conversation was anything but cosy. "It's beyond belief, Jane," Mrs. Harmon said, her hands fluttering over the teapot. 3 murders, all tied to that wretched rhyme. Gladys, poor girl, with that peg. It's diabolical. The village is terrified. They say the killer's following the rhyme to the letter. But what's left? The blackbirds." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her expression serene but her mind racing. "The blackbirds, my dear, are the key. 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. In the rhyme, they're a surprise, bursting free when the pie is opened. I suspect our killer sees their victims, or their secrets, as blackbirds, set free by each death. But the rhyme is a mask, meant to obscure the real motive." Mrs. Harmon's eyes widened. "You think it's all planned? Every detail?" "Oh, yes," Miss Marple said, sipping her tea. "The killer is meticulous, but human. And humans, my dear, always leave traces. Tell me, what do you know of Vivian Dubois? He seems to hover on the edges of this drama. Mrs. Harmon leaned forward, her voice dropping. He's a charmer, that one. An artist, but no starving bohemian. Adele adored him, bought his paintings, had him to the lodge constantly. The servants say he was there the week before Rex died. All smiles and flattery. But he's slippery, Jane. My cousin's friend in London says he's got debts, lives beyond his means. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail. Dubois' connection to Adele, coupled with his access to cyanide, made him a compelling figure. But his alibis, though thin, had withstood scrutiny. She thought of Lance, whose charm masked a sharper edge, and Mary Dove, whose poise seemed almost too perfect. The rhyme's progression, king, queen, maid, suggested a finite plan, but the blackbirds hinted at a broader reckoning, a release of truths the killer sought to expose. She thanked Mrs. Harmon and braved the rain to visit the lodge, where Elaine had become her ally. Clinging to Miss Marple's calm like a lifeline, they met in the library, a cavernous room where the storm's howl was muffled by thick walls. Elaine, her face drawn, offered a weak smile. "Miss Marple, you're a blessing. I can't sleep, can't think. The house feels like a trap, and, Lance, he's making it worse." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet. "My dear, tell me about Lance. He's unsettled everyone, hasn't he?" Elaine's hands twisted her handkerchief. "He's so carefree. It's unnatural, with Father and Adele and Gladys gone. Last night he was in the billiard room, laughing with Crump as if nothing's happened. Percival's beside himself, says Lance is mocking us. And Mary, she watches him, you know. I saw them talking in the hall, heads close together. It felt wrong." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained gentle. "Mary Dove, you say? She's a curious figure. And this talk of the will, has Percival shared more?" Elaine nodded, her voice dropping. "He found a codicil in Father's safe, dated 2 weeks before he died. It gives Lance control of the offshore account outright. Percival's furious. He says it's theft, that Lance manipulated Father. They argued again this morning, shouting so loud I hid in my room." Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking. "Money, my dear, is a great unmasker. And this rhyme, when the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. It's a signal, isn't it? The killer wants us to see the blackbirds, the secrets flying free. But whose secrets? And why now?" Elaine's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, Miss Marple, but I'm scared. What if the rhyme isn't finished? What if there's more?" Miss Marple patted her hand, her voice soothing. "There's always more, my dear, until the truth is out. But the truth has a way of rising, like dough in a warm kitchen. We must be patient." As she left the library, Miss Marple caught sight of Lance crossing the hall, his stride purposeful, a folder under his arm. He paused, meeting her gaze with a disarming smile. "Miss Marple, is it? You're quite the fixture here. Solving our little mystery, are you?" Miss Marple's smile was mild, but her eyes were keen. "I'm only an old lady, Mr. Fortescue, fond of puzzles. But this puzzle is a dark one, isn't it? The blackbirds are noisy today." Lance's grin faltered, just for a moment. "Noisy, maybe, but they'll quiet down soon. Always do." He tipped an imaginary hat and moved off, leaving Miss Marple to ponder his words. His charm, she thought, was a shield, but shields could crack. Back in the drawing room, Neil received a breakthrough. A photograph from Vivian Dubois' studio, sent by his London team. It showed a man in a cap, buying chemicals at the supply shop, his face partially obscured, but bearing a striking resemblance to Lance. The vial of cyanide, recovered from Dubois' darkroom, bore a smudged fingerprint, now being analysed. Neil's pulse quickened. Lance, with motive and opportunity, was emerging as the prime suspect. But the photograph's ambiguity gnawed at him. Was it Lance, or a clever frame? He confronted Mary Dove in the pantry, where she was labelling jars with her usual precision. "Miss Dove," he said, holding up the photograph, "this man bought cyanide. Look familiar?" Mary's eyes flicked to the image, her face impassive. "Hard to say, sir. The cap hides his face. Could be anyone." Neil's voice hardened. "You're too clever, Miss Dove. You've been in every room, heard every argument. If you're protecting someone, it'll come out." Mary's smile was faint, almost amused. "I protect myself, sir, by doing my job. I've no love for this family, but I've no reason to kill them either. Look to the money, Inspector. That's where the blackbirds nest." Neil let her go, his frustration mounting. Mary's deflection was masterful, but her words echoed his own suspicions. The offshore account, the codicil, the will. He turned to the forensic report, which confirmed the twine used to strangle Gladys came from the gardener's shed, accessible to all. The taxine, distilled with skill, suggested a killer with chemical knowledge. Lance, perhaps, or Dubois, or even Mary, whose education hinted at hidden depths. In the village, Miss Marple visited the blacksmith, Mr. Cobb, whose forge overlooked the lodge's gates. Over a cup of strong tea he shared a tidbit. "Saw Lance Fortescue 2 nights ago, coming back late from the village. Looked furtive, he did, carrying a bag. Didn't see what was in it, but he wasn't just out for a stroll." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "A bag, you say? Most curious." She thought of the chemical receipt, the cyanide vial, the photograph. Lance's movements, his charm, his motive, all pointed to him, but the puzzle was incomplete. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen letter had unmasked a blackmailer. The principle was the same. The smallest detail could break the case. As evening fell, the storm intensified, the wind rattling the lodge's windows. Neil gathered the household again, his voice grim. "I have evidence. A photograph, a fingerprint, a trail leading to one of you. The blackbirds are flying, and they're pointing to the truth. If you're innocent, help me. If you're guilty, you're running out of time." Lance leaned back, his grin defiant. "Quite a speech, Inspector. But you're bluffing. No one's confessing, and you've got nothing." Percival's voice was icy. "You're wrong, Lance. The truth's coming, and it'll bury you." Elaine, silent, clutched her shawl, her eyes on Mary Dove, who served tea with her usual calm. Miss Marple, seated quietly, watched them all, her needles still. "The birds are taking flight," she thought, "and the pie is open. But the baker is still hidden, waiting for their moment." She closed her eyes, the puzzle's pieces shifting. The killer was bold, but boldness bred mistakes. A photograph, a fingerprint, a glance, something would betray them. And Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, was ready to pounce. Chapter 9. The Pie's Crust. The 7th day at Yewtree Lodge dawned with a deceptive calm, the storm of the previous night giving way to a brittle, sunlit clarity that did little to dispel the pervasive dread. The murders of Rex Fortescue, Adele, and Gladys had woven a web of terror, each death a chilling verse in the nursery rhyme, Sing a Song of Sixpence, marked by rye grains and a meticulous fidelity to the rhyme's structure. The village of Baden Heath, its nerves frayed by fear, had become a crucible of rumour, with tales of blackbirds and curses swirling in every shop and lane. The press, relentless in their pursuit of sensation, crowded the Blue Boar Inn, their headlines painting Yewtree Lodge as a house of doom. Inspector Neal, his sharp eyes shadowed by exhaustion, stood in the library, its leather-bound volumes a silent witness to his relentless pursuit of the truth. The case had reached its climax. 3 murders, each tied to the rhyme's verses. King, queen, maid, pointed to a killer within the household, their motive a tangle of greed, betrayal, and hidden vendettas. The offshore account favouring Lance, Fortescue, Vivian Dubois' love letter to Adele, the chemical receipt near Gladys's body, and the damning photograph from Dubois' studio had narrowed the field. But the killer's identity remained just out of reach. The clothes peg on Gladys's nose, a grotesque flourish, had confirmed the murderer's theatrical bent, but Neal sensed a deeper purpose. The rhyme was a scaffold, supporting a meticulously planned revenge. His morning began with a final push. To break the case, his instincts honed on the photograph. A grainy image of a man resembling Lance, buying cyanide at a London shop. The fingerprint on the cyanide vial, now confirmed as Lance's, was the linchpin. Yet Neal's experience warned him against rushing to judgment. The killer was too clever for such an obvious slip. The evidence felt planted, a deliberate misdirection. He resolved to confront the household one last time, to shake the truth from their guarded silences. In the village, Miss Jane Marple sat in the tea shop, her knitting bag at her side, her mild demeanour masking a mind as sharp as a scalpel. The shop buzzed with gossip, the murders dominating every conversation. But Miss Marple listened with selective focus, her needles clicking softly. Mrs. Baker, the proprietress, leaned across the counter, her voice low with relish. "They're saying it's Lance Fortescue, miss. That photograph, clear as day, buying poison. And his fingerprint. The police are closing in, mark my words." Miss Marple's lips pursed, though her expression remained serene. "Photographs can be deceiving, my dear, and fingerprints, well, they travel easily, don't they? Tell me, has anyone seen Vivian Dubois lately? He seems to slip through the cracks." Mrs. Baker's eyes widened. "Now you mention it, he was at the Rose and Crown 2 nights ago, drinking alone. Looked agitated, not his usual suave self. My nephew's friend, a barman, heard him muttering about debts and promises." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail. Dubois' connection to Adele, his access to cyanide, and his shaky alibis made him a shadow player. But Lance's prominence in the evidence was too convenient. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a forged letter had pinned blame on an innocent man, only to unravel under scrutiny. The principle was the same. The killer's arrogance would be their undoing, a flaw hidden in their carefully crafted pie. She paid for her tea and made her way to Yewtree Lodge, where Elaine Fortescue, her fragile ally, had invited her for a quiet chat. The conservatory, with its lush ferns and glass walls, was a fragile refuge from the house's gloom, and Elaine's gratitude for Miss Marple's presence was evident in her trembling smile. "Miss Marple," she said, pouring tea with unsteady hands, "I can't thank you enough for coming. The police are everywhere, and Lance, they're saying he's the one. I don't know what to believe." Miss Marple settled into a wicker chair, her knitting bag at her feet. "My dear, belief is a luxury we can't afford just yet. Facts, however, are stubborn things. Tell me, has anything new come to light? About Lance, or perhaps Mary Dove?" Elaine's eyes flickered with fear. Percival found another letter in Father's study, hidden in a book. It was from Lance, written last month, thanking Father for the trust fund. It proves he knew about the money. Percival's convinced it's him, but... "I saw Mary Dove in the garden yesterday near the shed. She was holding a pair of shears, just standing there, staring at the roses. It gave me chills." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind turning over the image. "Mary Dove, you say? She's a puzzle, isn't she? So composed yet always present. And Lance, his charm is a mask, but for what? Guilt or something else?" Elaine's voice dropped to a whisper. "I overheard him talking to Crump last night in the hall. He said something about tying up loose ends. I didn't dare ask what he meant." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained gentle. "Most interesting, my dear. Loose ends, indeed. The rhyme, 24 blackbirds, baked in a pie, is a container, isn't it? The blackbirds are the secrets, flying free with each death. But the pie's crust is cracking, and the truth is seeping out." Back at the lodge, Neil prepared for his final confrontation, his evidence marshalled like troops for battle. The photograph, the fingerprint, the offshore account, the codicil, all pointed to Lance, but the murders of Adele and Gladys suggested a broader motive, a tapestry of resentment and retribution. He summoned the household to the drawing room, its heavy drapes drawn to block the morning sun, creating a stage for the denouement. Percival sat stiffly, his hands clenched, his spectacles glinting with barely contained rage. Elaine, beside him, clutched her shawl, her eyes red-rimmed. Lance lounged with his usual insolence, though his fingers betrayed a nervous twitch. Mary Dove stood by the tea-tray, her face a mask of calm, while Crump hovered near the door, his hands trembling. Miss Marple, invited as Elaine's guest, sat quietly in a corner, her knitting needles still, her presence almost overlooked. Neil's voice was steady, cutting through the room's tension. 3 murders, each a verse in this rhyme. Rex Fortescue, poisoned with taxine, rye in his pocket. Adele, killed with cyanide, rye on her tray. Gladys, strangled, a clothes peg on her nose, rye in the grass. The evidence points to one of you, and I'm done with lies. Lance Fortescue, your fingerprint was on a cyanide vial, and this photograph shows you buying the poison. Care to explain? Lance's grin was defiant, but his eyes darted to the door. You're grasping, Inspector. That photo's blurry. Could be anyone. And the fingerprint? Planted, obviously. I'm not stupid enough to leave my mark on a murder. Weapon! Percival's voice was icy. You're stupid enough to think you'd get away with it, Lance. Father's money, the trust fund, You killed him for it, then Adele and Gladys to cover your tracks. You're a monster." Elaine's sob broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Please stop, I can't bear this. Inspector, are you sure? Lance, he's family." Neil's gaze swept the room, lingering on Mary Dove, whose calm was unshaken. "Miss Dove, you've been at every crime scene, preparing the tea, the cocoa, noticing the rhyme. You've got an answer for everything, but I'm not convinced. What do you know?" Mary's eyes met his, cool and unflinching. "I know what I've seen, sir. Mr. Lance is clever, but reckless. Mr. Percival is bitter, consumed by duty. Mrs. Elaine is frightened, but loyal. The rhyme is a game, and someone's playing it to perfection. That's all I'll say." Miss Marple, her voice soft but clear, spoke from her corner, drawing every eye. "If I may, Inspector, the rhyme is indeed a game, but it's also a mirror. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. The blackbirds are the truths this killer wants exposed, greed, betrayal, secrets. But the pie's crust is fragile and it's breaking. The killer is here, and their arrogance will undo them." Neil's eyes narrowed, intrigued by her certainty. "Go on, Miss Marple. You've got a theory, I can tell." Miss Marple set down her knitting, her gaze steady. "Lance Fortescue is your killer, Inspector. He killed his father for the trust fund, Adele because she suspected him, and Gladys because she saw him tampering with the tea. The rhyme was his flourish, a way to make it seem like madness, to hide his greed. But he made mistakes, the photograph, the fingerprint, his own overconfidence." Lance leapt to his feet, his grin gone, his face pale. "That's absurd. You've got no proof, you old bat. That photo's a fake, and the fingerprint, someone set me up." Neil produced the photograph, holding it up. "This was taken at the chemical shop, Mr. Fortescue. And we found your prints on a vial in Dubois' studio, where you visited under a false name, posing as a buyer. You thought you were clever, using the rhyme to confuse us, but you overplayed your hand." Percival's voice was a hiss. "You bastard, Lance! You ruined us all!" Elaine's sob was muffled, her hands covering her face. Mary Dove, silent, watched with an unreadable expression, her hands folded, crump, trembling, backed toward the door. Lance's eyes darted to the window, his body tensing. "You're wrong, all of you. I didn't—" He bolted, shoving past Crump, his footsteps pounding toward the hall. Neil's constables, stationed outside, were ready, tackling him to the ground as he reached the front door. He cursed, struggling, but the handcuffs snapped shut, his defiance crumbling. Neil turned to Miss Marple, his expression a mix of respect and curiosity. "You saw it before I did, didn't you? The rhyme as a distraction." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. "I've seen many pies, Inspector, and they all crack eventually. Lance was clever, but human nature is predictable. Greed leaves traces, always." In the aftermath, Miss Marple sat with Elaine in the conservatory, the sun breaking through the clouds, casting dappled light on the ferns. Elaine, her face pale, but calmer, sipped tea, her voice soft. "How did you know, Miss Marple? The police had the photograph, the fingerprint, but you saw through it all." Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking. "My dear, I've lived a long time in a small village, and people are the same everywhere. Lance's charm was his weapon, but it was also his flaw. He thought he could outwit us all, using the rhyme to muddy the waters. But the blackbirds, the secrets, flew free, and they pointed to him. Elaine's eyes filled with tears. And Mary Dove? She suspected, didn't she? Miss Marple nodded. She's a clever girl, my dear. She saw the patterns, quoted the rhyme to nudge the inspector. But she's wise enough to know her place. She'll go far, I think. As Miss Marple prepared to leave, Mary Dove appeared, her apron crisp, her smile faint. "You're leaving, miss. You've done us a service, catching Mr. Lance." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I only pointed the way, my dear. You helped in your own fashion. Be careful, though. Cleverness can be a burden." Mary's smile widened just a fraction. "I'll manage, miss." Miss Marple boarded the train to St. Mary Mead that afternoon. Her knitting bag at her side, the case settled in her mind. The pie's crust had shattered, the blackbird scattered, and the truth had emerged as it always did. She thought of the rhyme, its cheerful verses hiding a darker truth. "Nursery rhymes," she murmured, "are never as simple as they seem." The train rattled on, carrying her home, where new puzzles, no doubt, awaited.